The Iliad by Homer, Book 2. The gods slept soundly that night, and the men by their war horses, but Zeus lay awake in the dark, thinking of how to honor Achilles and destroy Greeks by the shipload. His thoughts parted like storm clouds, and in the clear space between them he saw what seemed to be the best plan: to send to Agamemnon, son of Atreus, a woolly menace, a dream, and to it he spoke these feathery words. "Go, deadly dream, along the Greek ships until you come to the hut of Agamemnon, and deliver this message to him exactly. Order him to arm his long-haired Greeks. Now is his time to capture Troy. The Olympian gods are no longer divided. Hera has bent them all to her will, and targeted the Trojans for pain." The dream listened and went. Shadows flew around the Greek ships. It found Agamemnon wrapped in deep, starlit slumber. The dream stood above his head. It looked like Nestor, the old man that Agamemnon respected the most. Looked just like Nestor, and this dream that was a god addressed the king. "Asleep, son of Atreus, horse-breaker, wise man. You can't sleep all night. All these decisions to make, so many people depending on you. I'll be brief. I am a messenger from Zeus, who is far away, but loves you and pities you. He orders you to arm your long-haired Greeks. Now is your time to capture Troy. The Olympian gods are no longer divided. Hera has bent them all to her will, and targeted Troy for sorrow from Zeus. Think it over. Keep your wits about you, and don't forget this when sleep slips away." And the voice trailed off, leaving him there, dreaming of things that were never to be. He thought he would take Priam's city that day. The fool! He didn't know what Zeus had in mind. The pain and groans for both Trojans and Greeks, in the unendurable crush of battle. He woke from sleep, the god's voice eddying around him. He sat upright, pulled on a silky shirt, threw on a cloak, laced a pair of sandals on his shining feet, and hung from his shoulder a silver-worked sword, as he walked through the ships of the bronzed-kilted Greeks. Dawn had just reached the peak of Olympus, speaking light to Zeus and the other immortals. Agamemnon ordered the heralds to call the Greeks to assembly. The call went out, and the people gathered. Agamemnon seated the elders first by Nestor's ship, and unfolded his plan. "Listen, my friends. A dream from Zeus came to me last night in my sleep. It looked just like Nestor, same face, same build, and it stood above my head and spoke. Asleep, son of Atreus, horsebreaker, wise man. You can't sleep all night. All those decisions to make, so many people depending on you. I'll be brief. I am a messenger from Zeus, who is far away, but loves you and pities you. He orders you to arm your long-haired Greeks. Now is your time to capture Troy. The Olympian gods are no longer divided. Hera has bent them all to her will, and targeted Troy for sorrow from Zeus. Think it over." The dream said all of this, and off it flew, and I awoke from a sweet sleep. We'd better move if we're going to get the men in armor, but I'm going to test them first with a little speech. The usual drill. Order them to beat a retreat in their ships. It's up to each one of you to persuade them to stay. He had his say and sat down. Then up rose Nestor, king of sand-swept Pylos. He was full of good will in the speech he made. "Friends, Argive counselors and commanders, if any other Greek told us this dream, we would call it a lie and turn our backs on him. But this is a man with a claim to be the best of the Greeks. We'd better move, if we're going to get them in armor." And he headed out. The other commanders stood up, convinced he was right. The troops were moving now, swarming like insects over the beach, like bees that hum from a hollow rock in an endless line, and fly in clusters over flowers in spring, grouping themselves in aerial throngs. The Greeks made like that as they swarmed, out of the ships and the huts clutched beneath them. Filing through the deep sand into assembly, swept along by Zeus's emissary. Wildfire, rumor. They milled about in the assembly ground, and the earth groaned as the unruly crowd eased itself down. And 9 bawling heralds tried to stop their shouting, and get them to listen to their Zeus-spawned kings. They settled down finally and kept their seats, and stopped all the noise. Up stood Lord Agamemnon, holding a staff. Hephaestus had crafted this staff, and Hephaestus had given it to Cronion Zeus. Zeus in turn gave it to Quicksilver Hermes, and Hermes to Pelops, the charioteer. Pelops handed it on to Atreus, and when Atreus died, he left it to Thyestes. Thyestes left it for Agamemnon to bear, and rule over all the islands and all of Argos. Leaning on it now, he addressed the Greeks. "Danaan, heroes and soldiers. Zeus is a hard god, friends. He's kept me in the dark, after all his promises and nods my way that I'd raise Ilion's walls before sailing home. It was all a lie, and I see now that his orders are for me to return to Argos in disgrace, and this after all the armies I've destroyed. I have no doubt that this is the high will of the god who has toppled so many cities, and will in the future all glory to his power. But it will be a shame for generations to come that such a large and powerful army of Greeks has fought this futile war against a few puny men. There is no end in sight, nor has there ever been. Look, if the Greeks and the Trojans agreed to a truce, and both sides counted off, all of the Trojans who live in the city, and all of the Greeks, and if we Greeks formed up in platoons of 10, and each platoon picked a Trojan to pour our wine, there would be many platoons with no one to pour. That's how much our Greek forces outnumber the Trojans who live in the city. It's their allies, reinforcements from other cities, who keep hitting me hard and won't let me capture Ilion's serried fortress, no matter how hard I try. 9 years of great Zeus have passed. Our ships' timbers are rotten and their tackle loose. Our wives and little children are no doubt sitting at home waiting for us. And here we are, the job that we came to do unfinished. Now, this is what I say, and I want us all to obey. Let's clear out with our ships and head for home. There's no more hope. We will take Troy's tall town." This speech roused the spirits of the rank and file, the masses who had not been in on the council. The army started to move on the shore. Long waves form on the Icarian Sea when winds east and south explode from the clouds of Patriarch Zeus. Or the west wind rapes a field of deep wheat, rippling and tasseling the ears as it blows. So too these troop lines. Then the shouting began, and the mad rush to the ships, dust rising. in plumes over their feet as confused yells to fasten boat hooks, clear out launchways, and drag the ships down to the shining sea rose to the sky. They were going home. They had already begun to remove the chocks from under the hulls, and there might have been an unordained homecoming then for the Greeks if Hera had not had a word with Athena. "This is awful, child of Zeus, mystic daughter of the Aegis holder. Are we going to allow the Greeks to go home just like that? Rim away to their own country over the sea's broad back? They're not just going to hand Priam and the Trojans the glory, not to mention Helen of Argos, for whose sake many a Greek has perished in Troy, far from his homeland. Go down there now, along the ranks of the bronze-shirted Greeks, and with your mild words restrain each man. Don't let them haul their curved prows to the sea." And Athena streaked down from Olympus's crags, her eyes like owls, her gray in the blue air, and came quickly to the ships in the beachhead camp. She found Odysseus there, his mind like Zeus's own, standing in thought. He had not laid a hand on his benched black ship, and his heart was heavy. The owl-eyed goddess stood close to him and said, "Son of Laertes in the line of Zeus, wily Odysseus, are you Greeks going to run away just like that? Home to your fatherland over the sea's broad back? Are you just going to hand Priam and the Trojans the glory, not to mention Helen of Argos, for whose sake many a Greek has perished in Troy, far from his homeland? Now go down along all the ships of the bronze-shirted Greeks, and with your mild words restrain each man. Don't let them haul their curved prows to the sea." Odysseus knew that voice, and he set off at a run. Throwing his cloak behind him, Eurybates, the herald, his man from Ithaca, gathered it up, and he went up to Agamemnon and got from him his ancestral staff, that splinter of eternity, and with it went along the ships of the Greeks. Whenever he encountered a chieftain or the like, he tried to restrain him with gentle words. "What's gotten into you? I don't mean to frighten you, as if you were a coward, but sit down here yourself and make your men sit down. You don't really know Agamemnon's mind. He's just testing us now, but before long he's going to come down on us hard. Didn't we all hear what he said in council? If he gets angry, the whole army had better watch out. Kings are bred by Zeus and have tempers to match." But if he caught any of the ordinary soldiers yelling, he would belt them with the staff and bawl him out. "You there! Who do you think you are? Sit still and listen to your betters. You're a weakling, unfit for combat, a nothing in battle and in council. Do you think every Greek here can be a king? It's no good having a carload of commanders. We need one commander, one king, the one to whom Zeus, son of Cronus the Crooked, has given the staff and the right to make decisions for his people." And so Odysseus mastered the army. The men all streamed back from their ships and huts and assembled with a roar. A wave from the restless, churning sea crashes on a beach, and the water seethes and thunders. They had all dropped to the sand and were sitting there, except for one man, Thersites, a blathering fool and a rabble-rouser. This man had a repertoire of choice insults he used at random to revile the nobles, saying anything he thought the soldiers would laugh at. He was also the ugliest soldier at the siege of Troy. Bow-legged, walked with a limp, his shoulders slumped over his caved-in chest, and up top scraggly fuzz sprouted on his pointy head. Achilles especially hated him, as did Odysseus. because he was always provoking them. Now, he was screaming abuse at Agamemnon. The Achaeans were angry with him and indignant, but that didn't stop him from razzing the warlord. "What's wrong, son of Atreus? Something you need? Your huts are filled with bronze, and with women. We Achaeans pick out and give to you first of all, whenever we take some town. Are you short of gold? Maybe some Trojan horse breeder will bring you some out of Ilion as ransom for his son, whom I or some other Achaean has captured. Maybe it's a young girl for you to make love to, and keep off somewhere for yourself. It's not right for a leader to march our troops into trouble. You Achaeans are a disgrace. Achaean women, not men. Let's sail home in our ships and leave him here to stew over his prizes, so he'll have a chance to see whether he needs our help or not. Furthermore, he dishonored Achilles, who's a much better man. Achilles doesn't have an angry bone in his body, or this latest atrocity would be your last, son of Atreus." That was the abuse Agamemnon took from the mouse of Thersites. Odysseus was on him in a flash, staring him down with a scowl, and laid into him. "Mind your tongue, Thersites. Better think twice about being the only man here to quarrel with his betters. I don't care how bell-toned an orator you are. You're nothing but trash. There's no one lower in all the army that followed Agamemnon to Troy. You have no right even to mention kings in public, much less badmouth them so you can get to go home. We have no idea how things are going to turn out, what kind of homecoming we Achaeans will have. Yet you have the nerve to revile Agamemnon, son of Atreus, the shepherd of his people, because the Danaan heroes are generous to him? You think you can stand up in public and insult him? Well, let me tell you something. I guarantee that if I ever catch you running on at the mouth again, as you were just now, my name isn't Odysseus, and may I never again be called Telemachus's father. If I don't lay hold of you, strip your ass naked, and run you out of the assembly and through the ships, crying at all the ugly licks I land on you." And with that he wailed the staff down on Thersites' back. The man crumpled in pain, and tears flooded his eyes. A huge bloody welt rose on his back under the gold staff's force, and he sat there astounded, drooling with pain, and wiping away his tears. The troops, forgetting their disappointment, had a good laugh at his expense, looking at each other and saying, "Oh man, you can't count how many good things Odysseus has done for the Greeks, a real leader in council and in battle, but this tops them all. The way he took that loudmouth out of commission, I don't think he'll ever be man enough again to rile the commanders with all his insults." That's what they were saying in the ranks. Then Odysseus, destroyer of cities, stood up, holding the staff. Owl-eyed Athena transformed herself into a herald and silenced the troops, so that every man in the Greek army would listen closely to what he had to say. "Son of Atreus! The Greeks are out to make you, my lord, the most despised man on earth, and they have no intention of keeping the promise they made to you when they set out from Argos, not to mention until you pulled down Ilion's walls. They are like little children or widow women, the way they whine to each other about going home. God knows it's hard enough to make a man give up and go back. A man gets discouraged when he spends even 1 month away from his wife on his ship, battling winter winds and the surging sea. For us, it's 9 years we've been here now. I can't blame our men for getting discouraged as they wait beside their beaked ships, but still, it would be a disgrace to go home empty-handed after all this time. So bear up, friends, and let's stay long enough to find out whether Calchas has prophesied truly or not. Everyone here, and I'm talking about all of us, not carried off by the wings of death, remembers it. It seems like just yesterday when the ships were mustered at Aulis with their cargo of sorrows for Priam and the Trojans. We were gathered around a spring, offering sacrifice on sacred altars, perfect hecatombs, beneath a beautiful plane tree from under which the shining water flowed. Then we saw it, a serpent, its back blood red. Horrible! The Olympian himself must have brought it into the daylight. It slithered out from the altar and up the plane tree. A sparrow's fledglings were nested on the topmost branch. 8 little birds trembling under the leaves. Or 9, counting the mother who hatched them. And the serpent devoured them all as they cheeped pitifully. The mother fluttered around, mourning her nestlings, but he coiled and got her by the wing as she shrieked. After he had eaten the sparrow and her young, the very god who revealed him turned him to stone, an unmistakable portent from Zeus, son of Cronus. We stood there in awe of what had happened, this prodigy that crept into our sacrifice. Calchas was quick to pronounce its prophetic meaning. Why are you silent, all you long-haired Greeks? This great portent is a message from Zeus, whose glory shall never die. A portent late in coming and late to be fulfilled. As the serpent devoured the sparrow's children and the bird herself, 8 hatchlings, 9 counting the mother. So will we for as many years wage this war, but in the 10th year we will capture the city. That was his prophecy, and it has all come true. So let's have every Greek who ever strapped on armor stay put until we capture Priam's great city. He finished, and the Greeks cheered, so loud that the wooden hulls of the ships boomed with their approval of godlike Odysseus's speech. Then Nestor, the Gerenian rider, addressed them. Bah! You're carrying on like silly boys who have no business at all fighting a war. What will become of our compacts and oaths? Into the fire with our resolutions and plans. The pure wine we poured out, the hand clasps we trusted in. We are wrangling with words now, and will not find thereby the ways or means to stay the course for long. Son of Atreus, assert yourself, and resume your command of all the Greek forces in all their grueling battles. To hell with those 1 or 2 Achaeans with private plans, which will come to nothing. To return to Argos before we know for sure whether Zeus's promise was a lie or not. I say that the Aegis holder nodded his assent on that day when the Argives came in their ships, with their cargo of carnage and death for the Trojans. Lightning on the right, favorable signs revealed. No man here should be in a hurry to go home until he has spent the night with some Trojan's wife, as revenge for Helen's struggles and groans. But if anyone is so almighty eager to go back home, let him touch his black ship, so he can seal his fate before the whole army. But now, my lord, be prudent and take the advice, hardly negligible, that I am about to give. Divide the men by tribes and clans, Agamemnon, so that clans and tribes can support each other. If you do this and the army complies, you will know which of your captains is a coward, and which is brave, and so too with the soldiers, for they will fight as units. You will know too whether it is heaven's will that you not take the city, or that your men are cowards and witless in war. He spoke, and Lord Agamemnon answered. Once again, Nestor, the best speech of all. Father Zeus, Athena, and Apollo, give me 10 such counselors, and Priam's city would lay her head in our lap, taken and ravaged. But Zeus, son of Cronus, has given me grief, embroiling me in pointless quarrels. Yes, Achilles and I argued over a girl, and it was I who grew angry first. If we two could agree, there would not be the slightest postponement of evil for Troy. But go, eat now, so we can get this battle together. Sharpen your spears and dress your shields. Lay out fodder for your horses, and inspect your chariots. We're going to war. We're going to fight all day and hate every minute, without any breaks until it's dark. Too dark to see. It's going to be chests sweating under shield straps, hands sore from gripping spears, horses sweaty from pulling us around in our polished cars. And if I catch anyone even think about staying out of the fight back here with the ships, the dogs and birds will have him by nightfall. The cheer that followed this speech came on like a wave that pounds a high cliff, a wave swollen by wind against a jutting crag that is constantly worried by wind-driven waves from every direction. The men stood up and scattered to their ships, made fire in their huts, and took their meal, and each made sacrifice to his favorite god, praying to escape from battle alive. The warlord Agamemnon sacrificed a fat bull, 5 years old, to Cronus's almighty son, and he summoned the elders, the best of the Achaeans, Nestor first of all, and the warlord Idomeneus. Then the 2 Ajaxes, and Tydeus' son, Diomedes, and as the 6th, Odysseus, Zeus's match in wisdom. Menelaus, the rallier, came on his own, knowing that what his brother was up against. They stood around the ox and took up the barley grains, and the warlord Agamemnon led them in prayer. Zeus, most glorious, most great, dark cloud that art in heaven, may the sun not set nor darkness gather until I have cast Priam's roof beam smoldering to the ground, and burned his doorways with consuming fire. And may I tear Hector's heart out with bronze, and may many of his comrades fall headlong around him, face down in the dust. But Zeus would not grant his prayer. Not yet. He accepted Agamemnon's sacrifice, but blew upon his woes and increased them. After the prayers and the strewing of barley, they cut the ox's throat and flayed it, jointed the thigh bones and wrapped them in a layer of fat with cuts of meat on top. These were roasted over split kindling wood, with the thigh pieces. They were charred, and they had tasted the tripe. They cut the rest into strips, skewered it on spits, and roasted it carefully. When they were done and the feast was ready, feast they did, and no one lacked an equal share. When they had eaten and drunk to their heart's content, Nestor the Gerenian horseman spoke. Son of Atreus, my lord Agamemnon, let us remain gathered here no longer, nor delay the work that the gods have given us. Have the heralds of the bronze-armored Greeks make proclamation all through the ships, and muster the army. We will patrol camp in a group to waken Ares more quickly. He spoke, and the warlord Agamemnon ordered the heralds to muster the troops. In battle formation, they gave their skirling cry, and all the commanders around Atreus' son hurried to have their men fall in. And in their midst, Athena, eyes like slate, carried the aegis, priceless and out of all time, pure gold tassels flying in the wind, each woven strand worth 100 oxen. And the goddess herself, glowing like moonlight, rushed over the sand, sweeping them on, and stiffening their hearts, so that for each of them to die in battle was sweeter than going home. A fire raging through endless forests in a mountain range can be seen far away as a distant glow. Likewise, the glare from the advancing army's unimaginable bronze, an eerie light that reached the stratosphere. Migratory birds, cranes, geese, or long-necked swans are gathering in a meadow in Asia, where the river Castrius branches out in streams. For a while they fly in random patterns, for the pure joy of using their wings, but then with a single cry they start to land, one line of birds settling in front of another, until the whole meadow is a carpet of sound. Likewise, from the ships and huts, tribe after tribe poured out onto the Scamander's floodplain, and the ground groaned and reverberated under their feet and the hooves of their horses, and they stood in the flowering meadow there, countless as leaves or as flowers in their season. Innumerable throngs of buzzing flies will swarm all over a herdsman's yard in springtime when milk wets the pails. Likewise, the throngs of long-haired Greeks who stood on the plain facing the Trojans, intent on hammering them to pieces. And as goatherds easily separate out wide flocks of goats mingled in pasture, so the commanders drew up their troops to enter battle, and Lord Agamemnon moved among them like Zeus himself. The look in his eyes, the carriage of his head, with a torso like Ares's, or like Poseidon's. Picture a bull that stands out from the herd, head and horns above the milling cattle. Zeus on that day made the son of Atreus, a man who stood out from the crowd of heroes. Tell me now, muses, who live on Olympus, for you are goddesses, and are present, and know all things, while we hear only reports and know nothing. Who were the Greek captains and lords? The rank and file I could never name, not even if I had 10 tongues, 10 mouths, a voice that never broke, and a bronze heart, unless the Olympian muses, daughters of Zeus, called to my mind all those who came under Ilion's walls. Now I will call the roll of the ships. The Boeotians were led by Peneleus and Leitus, with Arcesilaus, Protoenor, and Clonius. Their towns were Hyria, rocky Aulis, and Shoenus, Scolus, ridged Edeonius, Thespaia, Graea, broad Mycelesis, Harma, Elysion, Erythrae, Ilion, Hyle, Petion, Ocalia, Medion, Copae, Etresius, dove-coated Thespe, Coronea, grassy Haliartus, Platea, Glycis, Lower Thebes, Onchestus, Posidion with its grove, and Arne with its vineyards, Midea, sacred Nysa, and on the coast Anthedon, 50 ships, and aboard each ship 120 young men of Boeotia. The minions from Aspledon and Orchomenos were led by Ascalaphus and Ialmenos, son of Ares, born to Astyoche, then a virgin, in the palace of Actor, son of Asius, when she had the god in her upstairs room. There 30 vessels were drawn up in rows. The Phocians were led by Schedius and Epistrophus, sons of Iphitos, grandsons of Naubulus. Their towns were Cyparissus and rocky Pytho, sacred Chrysa, Daulis, Panopeus, Anamoria, Hyampolis on the river Cephissus, and Lilaea by the springs of Cephissus. 40 black ships formed their contingent, and their leaders marshaled their ranks, left of the Boeotians as they readied for war. The Locrians were led by swift Ajax, son of Oileus, not as great as Telamonian Ajax, not nearly, a small man who wore a linen corselet, but with a spear, the best soldier in Greece. They lived in Cainus, and Ophis and Calliaris, in Bessa and Scarphe, and lovely Algae, in Tarphe and Thronion, by the streams of Boagrius. Ajax led 40 black ships, manned by Locrians, who dwell over ancient sacred Euboea. The Abantes, who hold Euboea and Chalcis, Eretria, and the vineyards of Histiaea. Seaside Cerinthus and the steep stronghold of Dios, and those in Charistus, and also in Styra, were led by Elaphenor, a scion of Ares, and son of Chalcedon. He was chief of the Abantes, a spirited people, swift and hot-tempered, their hair long in the back, spearmen eager, with outstretched spears to rend enemy corselets. 40 black ships followed Elaphenor. Those who held Athens, the well-founded citadel, and the land of Erechteus, whom Athena fostered after the grain field bore him, and made him live in her own rich precinct, where Athenian youths still propitiate him yearly with rams and bulls. These were led by Menestheus, Petias' son. This man had no equal anywhere on earth, at marshalling chariots and infantry, rivaled only by Nestor, who was his elder. 50 black ships followed Menestheus. Ajax led from Salamis 12 ships, and stationed them by the Athenian contingent. Those who held Argos and walled Tiryns, and Hermione and Asini, on the deep gulf, Troezen and Ionia, and vine-clad Epidaurus, and the Achaean youths in Aegina and Maces. All these were led by Diomedes and Asthenius, son of Capaneus, with Euryalus as a third, but the commander-in-chief was Diomedes. And 80 black ships followed him, those who held Mycenae's citadel, and wealthy Corinth, and those in Cleonae, and in Orneae, and lovely Araethrae, and in Sicyon, where Adrastus first was king, and those in Hyperegia, and steep Gonoessa, and in Pellane, and around Aegium, throughout all Aegialis, and around wide Hellas. All these were commanded, 100 ships, by Lord Agamemnon, son of Atreus. His contingent was far the largest and best, and among them he put on his gleaming bronze, glorying, preeminent among all. And the army he led was largest of all. Those who lived in Lacedaemon's gulches, in Pharis and Sparta, in dove-haunted Messe, and those in Brysae, and lovely Augeae, and Amyclae, and Hellas, a citadel by the sea, and those in Laos, and the environs of Oetelis, These were led by Agamemnon's brother, Menelaus, whose voice carried in battle, in 60 ships marshaled separately. And he moved among them with confidence, urging them into war. He wanted most of all requital for Helen's struggles and groans. Those who lived in Pylos and lovely Arene, in Thyron, ford of Alpheus and Iepi, in Psyche Perseus and Amphigenia, in Petelios and Hellas and Dorium, where the Muses met Thamyris and stopped his song, as he journeyed from Eurydice's home in Oechalia, boasting he would win even if the Muses, daughters of Zeus, were to sing against him. And in anger they maimed him, took away his melody, and silenced his lyre. All these Gerenian Nestor led, and had 90 hollow ships drawn up in rows. Those who held Arcadia in Cylene's shadow beside Aeepetus's tomb, where men fight hand to hand, and those in Pheneos and Orchomenos, in Ripe and Stratia and windy Anispe, those who held Tegea and Mantineae, those who held Stymphalis and lived in Parrhasia. All these Agapenor led, Ancaeus' son, 50 ships, and each ship had on board many Arcadians who knew how to fight. Agamemnon himself had given them ships to cross over the sea's grey wine, for the Arcadians knew nothing of sailing the sea. Those from Buprasium and shining Elis, and the land that Hermine and Myrsinus enclose on the coast, and between Olin Rock and Elysium, all those had 4 leaders, each with 10 ships, with many Achaeans aboard. The captains were Amphimachus and Thalpius, both of Actor's line, one Cteatus' son, the other of Eurytus. Third was mighty Diores, son of Amarynceus. Fourth was godlike Polysinus, Augeas' son. Those from Dulichium and the Holy Islands, the Echinias, that lie in the sea offshore from Elis, had Mages as leader, peer of Ares, whom Phyleus, dear to Zeus, had begotten, the horseman Phyleus, who once upon a time had moved to Dulichium angry with his father. 40 black ships followed Mages to Troy. Odysseus led the proud Cephallenians who held Ithaca, and forested Neriton, and those in Crocylea, and rugged Aegyptus, in Zacynthus and Samos, and all those who lived along the mainland coast, opposite these islands. Odysseus led them, peer of Zeus in council, and 12 vermilion prows followed him to Troy. The Aetolians were led by Adraemon's son, Thoas. They lived in Pleuron, Olenos, Pylene, in seaside Chaucis and rocky Saladon, for great-hearted Oeneus' sons were gone, and he himself was dead, and blond Meleager, who once was told to rule all Aetolia. 40 black ships followed Thoas to Troy. The Cretans were led by Idomeneus. Their cities were Knossos and walled Gortys, Lictus and Miletus, and lime-white Lycastus, Phaestus and Ritium, well-peopled cities, and all who dwelled in Crete's 100 towns. Idomeneus, famed for his spear, was captain, as was Meriones, who could kill like Ares. 80 black ships sailed with them to Troy. Heracles' son, Telepialamimus, a good man and big, led 9 ships from Rhodes. The Rhodians were divided into 3 contingents, Lindos, Ialesis, and lime-white Chamaeris. They were led by the warrior Tlepolemus, born to great Heracles by Astyochia, whom he had taken out of Ephyrae, and away from the river Celeus, after pillaging the cities of many a hero. But when Tlepolemus came of age in the palace, he killed his father's dear uncle, Lysimenius, a scion of Ares. Then, getting on in years, he quickly built a fleet, gathered a following, and took flight on the sea, threatened by the other sons and grandsons of mighty Heracles. He came to Rhodes in his painful wanderings, and his people settled in 3 regions by tribes. They were loved by Zeus, who ruled gods and men, and the son of Cronus showered them with wealth. Nereus led 3 trim ships from Cyme. Nereus was the son of Aglaia and Charops, king of Cyme, and was the handsomest man of all the Danaans who came to Troy, after the flawless son of Peleus. But he was weak, and few men followed him. Those who held Nisyrus and Carpathus, Casus and Cos, Eurypylus' city, and the Calydinian islands were led by Pheidipus and Antiphus, the 2 sons of Thessalus, Heracles' son. Their 30 vessels were drawn up in rows, those who inhabited Pelasgian Argos, and lived in Alos, Alope and Trachis, and held Pythia and Hellas, land of fair women, and were known as Myrmidons, Hellenes, Achaeans. Achilles commanded their 50 ships. But none of them now thought of gruesome war, since there was no one to lead them into the ranks. The great Splinter lay idle in their beachhead camp, nursing his wrath because of the girl, fair-haired Briseis, whom he had taken after great effort out of Lyrnessus when he sacked that town and leveled Thebes' walls, and cut down Mynes and Epistrophus, King Evenos' sons, great warriors both. Heartsick for her, and angry, Achilles lay idle, but he would soon rise again. Those in Phylace and flowering Pyrrhasus, Demeter's sanctuary, and those in Iton, mother of flocks, in Antron by the sea, and in the grasslands of Petelios, all these were led by Protesilaus, while he still lived. The black earth was now held him. His wife, cheeks torn, was left in Phylace, his house half built. A Darnanian killed him as he leapt from his ship, the first Greek ashore. His men were not leaderless, though they missed their leader. For Podarces marshaled them, son of Epiclus Phylacides, rich in flocks, and Protesilaus' brother. But Protesilaus was older and a better man, a hero, and though his men did not lack a leader, they yearned for him. 40 black ships followed Protesilaus to Troy. Those in Pherae beside Lake Boebius, and in Boebe, Glaphyrae, and well-built Iolcos, were in 11 ships led by Eumelus, Admetus' son by a glorious woman, Alcestis, loveliest of Peleus' daughters. Those in Methone and Thalmacia, in Meliboe and rugged Olizon, came in 7 ships led by Philostates, the great archer, and aboard each ship were 50 oarsmen skilled with the bow. But Philostates now lay in pain on an island, sacred Lemnos, where the Achaeans stranded him, afflicted with a wound from a deadly snake. He lay there in anguish, but the Greeks at Troy would soon remember Lord Philostates. Nor were these men leaderless. Medon marshaled them, Oileus' bastard son, whom Rene bore to the pillager Oileus. Those in Tricca and craggy Ithome, and those in Oechalia, Eurytus' city, were led by the 2 sons of Asclepius, Podalyrus and Machaon, good healers both, with 30 vessels drawn up in rows. Those who held Ormenios and the spring Hypereia, and Asterion and Titanos' white peaks, were led by Eurypylus, Euaemon's great son. 40 black ships sailed with him to Troy. Those who held Argissa and lived in Girtone, in Orthe, Elone, and white-bricked Olosan, were led by Polypoetes, staunch in battle, son of Pirithous, whom deathless Zeus begot. Gloried Hippodamia conceived Pylopoetus that day when Pirithous punished the shaggy centaurs, drove them from Pelion and to the Aethisis. Leontius shared the command, Cyaneus' grandson. 40 black ships sailed with them to Troy. Gounius led 22 ships from Cyphus, and with him came the Enines and Paraebai, who had settled around wintry Dodona, and in the fields around the stream Titaresius, a tributary of the Peneus. Its lovely water does not mingle with Peneus' silver eddies, but glides on its surface like olive oil, a branch of Styx, the dread water of oaths. The Magnetes, who lived around Peneus and forested Pelion, were led by swift Prothus, son of Tenthredon, in 40 black ships. These were the leaders of the Danans. But tell me now, Muse, who were the best of men and of horses in the Atreides' army? The best horses were the mares of Eumulus, swift as birds of the same age with matching coats, and their backs were as even as a leveling line. Apollo's silver bow had bred them in Pyrrhia, a team of mares who bore panic in battle. The best warrior was Telamonian Ajax, while Achilles was in his rage, for Achilles was second to no one, as were the horses that bore Peleus' flawless son. But now he lay idle among his beaked sea-going hulls, furious with Agamemnon, the shepherd of the people, the son of Atreus. Achilles' men amused themselves on the shore, throwing the discus and javelin and shooting their bows. The horses stood beside their chariots, champing lotus and marsh parsley. The chariots lay covered in their owners' huts. The men missed their leader. They tramped through the camp and had no part in fighting. The army marched, and it was as though the land were swept with fire. Earth groaned beneath them, as beneath Zeus when in his wrath he thunders, and lashes the country of the Eremai with lightning, where men say Typhoeus lies in the ground. So the earth groaned under their feet, as they pressed on quickly over the plain. Zeus notified the Trojans of all this by sending Iris streaking down to Ilion. She found the citizens assembled in one body, young and old alike, near Priam's gate, talking. Iris positioned herself nearby, and made her voice sound like Politis's, a son of Priam, who, trusting his speed, often sat as lookout on top of the barrow. Of old Aisteus, watching for any movement of Greek troops from their ships, using his voice, the goddess said to Priam, "Sir, you are as fond of endless speeches now as you were in peacetime, but this is war. I have been in a battle or two, but never have I seen an army like this, covering the plain like leaves, or like sand, as it advances to attack the city. Hector, you're in charge of this operation, but because there are so many allies here, with different languages from points abroad, each captain should give the word to his own men, and lead them out marshaled by cities." Hector knew this was a goddess's speech, and dismissed the assembly. They rushed to arms, and all the gates were opened, and the troops poured through them, on foot and in war cars. In front of the city there is a steep hill, out in the plain, level terrain all around it. Men call this hill Bataei. Immortals call it the Barrow of Myrene, the Dancer. It was here that the Trojans and their allies drew up their troops in companies. The Trojans were led by great Hector, son of Priam, in his shining helmet. His contingent was far the largest and the best, arrayed for battle, resolute with their spears. The Dardanian troops were led by Aeneas, whom bright Aphrodite bore to Anchises, a goddess lying with a mortal man in the foothills of Ida. Sharing the command were Antenor's two sons, Archilochus and Acamas, skilled in all forms of combat. The Troes, who lived in wealthy Zelaya, at Ida's foot, and drank the Aesopus' dark water, were led by the glorious son of Lycaon, Pandarus, whose bow was a gift from Apollo. Those who held Adrasteia and the deme Apaesus and Pitaiae in the steep Mount Teriae were led by Adrastus and Amphius, with linen corslets, sons of Merops and Persode. This man knew divination and forbade his sons to go to war, but they would not listen, for death's black birds were calling them on. Those who lived around Persode and Practios, who held Cestus and Abetus and bright Arisbe, were led by Asius Hirticides, a born leader. Asius, whom his great chestnut horses had drawn from Arisbe and the river Selaeus, the Pelasgian tribes, ferocious spearmen, from fertile Larissa, were led by Hippothous, with his brother Pylaeus. They were sons of Pelasgian Lathus, grandsons of Teudemus. Acamas and Paeris led all the Thracians, beyond the strong current of the Hellespont. Euphemus captained the Siconian spearmen, son of Troezenus and grandson of Caius. Pyraetrimus led the distant Paeonians, with curved bows, from Amydon and the river Axius, whose water flows fairest over the earth. Pylaemenes, shaggy heart, led the Paphlagonians from the land of the Aneti, where the mules run wild. Their cities were Cytoros and Sesamos, and they lived around the river Parthenios, in Cromna, Aegialos, and high Erythrine. Odius and Epistrophus led the Halizones, from distant Alybe, ancient source of silver. The Mysians were led by Chromis, and Enomis, who foretold the future from the flight of birds, but could not ward off the black birds of death. They would be slain in the river by the terrible sword of swift Achilles, Aesius' grandson, when he killed many more there. Phoris and Asanius led the Phrygians from distant Asania, battle-hungry troops. The Maeonians were led by Mesthyllus and Antiphus, Taleamenes' sons, whose mother was the nymph of Lake Gygae under Mount Tmolus. Nastes led the Carians, who spoke a foreign tongue. Their strongholds were Miletus and Mount Phyteres, and the streams of Meander and Mycales' steep crests. Amphimachus shared the command with Nastes, who came to the war wearing gold like a girl, the fool, but it could not save him from death. Achilles killed him in the rush through the river without a second thought, and bore off the gold. Sarpedon and Glaucus captained the Lycians, who came from the far-away, swirling Xanthus.